Hi class, today we're going to talk about calculator usage and some basic functions on the calculator for pre-algebra here. So the first thing I want to talk about is inputting fractions. So these calculators can do fractions, and so if you look on this first one, this one here, this is my favorite calculator that I use the most often. And so on this calculator, the fraction button is right here. It says n over d, which means numerator over denominator. So you can press that button. Oop, let's turn it on. We can press that button right there, and what appears here is a little fraction ready to input. And if I want to put 1/2 in, I'm going to put 1 for the top, come over here to the toggle button, which is left, right, up, or down, and I'm going to toggle down to the bottom, and I'm going to input 2, and I can press the arrow over to get out of the fraction up there. So I have 1/2, and I can press enter, and it gives me the answer 1/2 because it's in this most simplest form. On the other calculators right here, that's the fraction button, similar space, but it looks a little bit different. You press that, it has the same function up here. You can push 1. Here's the little toggle. We're going to press down to go down to the bottom of the fraction, enter the 2, over, and enter, and that gives us 1/2. And then this one over here, the fraction button looks a little bit different. It says A, B over C. And this one works a little bit different, where you have to put the first number, the top number, the 1, and then you press the fraction button, and notice it shows up a little bit different. It just has a little divider there, and then the 2, and you press enter, and that's how it presents the 1/2 fraction. Now let's say we don't want these numbers as a fraction, but rather we want them changed into a decimal version. Let's go back to this first calculator here. This little button down here with the 2 arrows right above the enter sign, it will change it from the fraction form to the decimal form. So 1/2 is the same as 0.5. If we had the fraction in there, if we already had the decimal in there, we could press this button and it would take it back to its fraction form. So this goes between fraction and decimal form. We move on to this calculator. It has that same feature, but this time that button is here. It says SD, standard to decimal. So if you press that button, it'll go from 1/2 to 0.5, and you press it again, it can go back and forth showing you the different formats, whether it's a decimal format or a fractional format. And then over here on this one, right here, it says F to D, fraction to decimal. So if we press that, it changes it to 0.5. And if we press it again, it changes it back to 1/2. So they all have the same function, just a little bit different location of those buttons. We're going to clear it all off. And one more thing is, if we wanted to do a mixed number, that's where you have a whole number and a fraction next to it, it's the same button, but it has a different level. So each button can do 2 things. So notice above here, I got to press the second button. So that goes to its second function, and it gives it to me where I can put in a mixed number. So I can put in 1 and 3/4, for example. I just got to arrow over to the different spots, and I press enter, and it changes it to an improper fraction. And I can press the toggle button, and it changes it to a decimal. So you've got to be looking for that button. Here it's the same one. We got to hit the second level, so this is a shift. And that button, and it gives us the improper fraction, 1 and 3/4. Press enter. Same thing, and we can hit this to change it to a decimal back to a fraction. And then over here, it's a little bit different, that same button. And remember, you have to put the number first. So if we're going to put 1 and 3/4, we put 1, fraction button 3, fraction button 4. And that gives us 1 and 3/4, and it can change it to the improper fraction of 7/4. And once again, we can change it to the decimal version. So next, we want to talk about entering negative numbers. So if I want to enter a negative number, I'm going to use this negative button here, -3, which is different than the subtraction button. So -3, we can then have a negative number in there. So we put the negative and then the 3. Same thing over here, except the negative button is located in a different location. So I hit the negative button, 5. We have -5. And then over here on this calculator, here's the negative button, which is in parentheses, which differentiates it from the subtraction button. So if I hit -9, and we have a negative number in the calculator. Now we want to clear that off, and we're going to talk about taking a square or taking something to a power. So if I want to do 5 squared, I hit the 5, and then I go over here to this little arrow up button and I press it, and let's say I want to put in 5 squared. That's 5 raised to the 2nd power, which means 5 times 5, which gives me 25. Over here on this calculator, let's say we want to do 2 to the 4th power. I'm going to put in 2. And this little button right here, it has an X and then a little box up in the power location. If you press that, it gives me this little box up here, and I can put in the 4. That's 2 to the 4th power, which is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. We're going to enter it, and that gives me 16. Over here on this calculator, let's say we're going to do 9 squared. 9 raised to the 2nd power, which is 81 because it's 9 times 9. So remember, raising something to the power, if it's the 2nd power, it's squared. If it's the 3rd power, it's cubed. And after that, we just say 4th power, 5th power, and so on. We're cleared off here. And one more thing we want to talk about is taking the square root, which is opposite of squaring. So over here, if we want to take the opposite of squaring, the square root symbol, it's right above this x squared. See this little square root symbol right up here? It's in green. Every button on here has 2 functions. To get to the 2nd function, I have to hit this 2nd button. So I'm going to hit 2nd, and then this x squared button so I can get to the square root symbol. Let's put the square root of 100. The square root of 100 is asking what number times itself gives me 100, which is 10. Because 10 times 10 equals 100, the square root of 100 is 10. Let's go over here. The square root button is located here. I'm going to hit the square root. And then I'm going to put, let's say we put the square root of 36 equals 6, because 6 times 6 equals 36, so the square root of 36 is 6. And let's go to this final calculator. The square, x squared is here, so up here is the 2nd level. So we're going to have to hit the shift button to get to the square root symbol, shift, square root. And if I'm going to square root, what can we square? 81. I'm going to square root 81, and I get 9. Square root of 81 is 9, so that is the square root button. I'm going to show you one more thing on here before we finish up, and let's say I'm taking the square root of 50, square root of 50, and I press enter. And notice it doesn't give me a whole number or a decimal or a fraction. It just simplifies it, but leaving it in square root format. We're going to talk more about what that means as we go through pre-algebra and algebra. But for right now, if you want to turn that into a decimal number that we can use to compare, you're going to go down here to this toggle button again, and you're going to get it in a form that we can use, the decimal form. So 5 square roots of 2 is 7.07106, so on and so forth. And if we were going to round that, it would be 7.07, and that would be a more useful form of that number that we can use. So hopefully this kind of gives you an introduction on using fractions on your calculator, mixed numbers, positive, negative numbers, squaring, square root, and how to change the form or toggle to the different formats. Whichever calculator you use, I recommend you use the same calculator in every class period so you can get used to how your calculator works. Phone calculators generally don't work as well as these calculators, so I recommend you using one of these class ones, or if you can or have one at home, bring that in and we can make sure you know how to use your own calculator. Alrighty guys, thanks.